Okay, let's talk a little bit about the functionalist perspective on deviance. And in fact, we actually mentioned some of these things already in that some of the functions of deviance, which will give us some more structure of what is the in-group and what is the out-group, or deviance will, if it's not necessarily negative deviance, positive deviance will be innovative. I think the most prevalent idea in deviance, generally speaking, is that things are negative. A deviant sexual act or something like that, which so people think of deviance as something negative. But deviance is not necessarily negative at all. We know that in sociology we talk of deviance as just something away from the norm. If it's away from the norm, it could be positive or negative. Oprah Winfrey is certainly deviant in that she's making a lot more money than the norm. That somebody is any innovative technology is because somebody has had some sort of creative deviance in their way of thinking. So all these things are ways of thinking of deviance as being something away from the norm. But we are focusing on the fact that there's a norm. Now, what happens when the norms themselves break down? When there's a social condition, when people experience a lack of social norms. And in fact, in the beginning of sociology, with Emile Durkheim looking at the French Revolution, there was a scattering of the boundaries of social behavior, and that spawned the interest in what can keep a society together, and the interest in looking into sociology in general. And he described the situation where people lack social norms, and he called it anomie. In the society, it causes society inability and an instability from the lack of purpose and the lack of ideals. And this causes a confusion and rootlessness, and almost an acceptance of all behaviors, because there's the boundaries of deviance are just loose or lacking. So there's a free-flowing acceptance or uncomfortable rootlessness because the norms are not well defined. You know, and so on the flip side, what are the good things about deviance? In other words, you need the norms in order to define what's going out of the norms, define the deviance. When you have the norms, what do they do for you? Well, it clarifies the rules. It tells you where the boundaries are. The punishment of deviance strengthens the rules and their meaning. You know that you cannot move past this because look how he was constrained, and look how she was, couldn't get away with doing that. So we know exactly what one can do and can't do. Also, if you recall, we talked about in-groups and out-groups. Okay, and one of the ways of solidifying an in-group is by identifying the out-group. Well, how do you identify an out-group? Well, an out-group is the one who does things different from us, right? Because we do things different from them. So we are the in-group and they are the out-group. Now, what does that mean? That's the same thing as our own specific social norms, right? So we, as the in-group, will keep our society exactly the way it is. And those who deviate will get punished. Okay, so that will help will help define, and even more so, it will if the deviants are perceived as a threat, so our group is strengthened. If you remember in the Robbers Cave experiment, only one group can win, so therefore they were a threat, right? And they were, and that happens all the time. Illegal immigrants are perceived as a threat, so that brings together the people who want to be strong as ourselves, as our identity, and not them, because they are going to ruin our society. But the other thing is, you have to look at it from a larger perspective. You know, the deviance itself can promote social change. This is sort of like a contradiction in terms. It's very curious that it can do both things. It will stop deviant behavior, but it also, on the other hand, it promotes social change. In other words, especially if you talk about organized deviance, such as civil disobedience. Civil disobedience obviously will cause social change, as we saw in the 60s, for instance, with the school boycotts and the whole civil rights movement in the 60s. Then we saw later, built on that same that same paradigm, there were many other civil rights types of movements which redefines and redefines deviance. And although, like for instance, homosexuality and gay behavior, while it's still considered deviance in many parts of the country, certainly in parts of New York City or San Francisco or Seattle, Washington, they're not considered deviant at all. And that's because they have moved past that. They have campaigns of advertisements and public demonstrations of gay rights and homosexual behavior that has expanded the boundaries of accepted behavior and norms, so that certain places in the big cities, these are not considered deviance in their own communities, and certainly pushing the boundaries of their communities geographically also. So you see that the deviance itself can change and cause social change. Now, let's get back to the idea of enemy, which from Durkheim we know that enemy, you think the boundaries are no longer there. So freedom might say, but that's not. It doesn't have freedom. It actually causes some sort of strain, because it's more difficult to decide exactly how one is going to behave without those constraints and without the norms and without the folkways which define who we are and how we behave. And the people desire, if people desire to reach a to reach a certain social goal, right? And the norms of society put some sort of behavioral block on them, then it's going to be difficult. For sometimes they're the opposite of enemy. They feel too much strain. And that too much strain can block achieving a certain goal. So for instance, if one wants to make a lot of money, or one wants to become a famous artist, or one wants to do some sort of goal which is accepted in society. But there's obstacles to achieving that. The society is putting some sort of, so the people feel a strain in those social goals because they can't get a legitimate means of attaining that goal. So there's no correspondence in the goal itself and the norms. Now that puts what we call a strain. A fellow sociologist by the name of Robert Merton developed what he called strain theory. And the strain theory talks about what happens when the goals of society and the norms of society don't correspond for a particular person or group of people. Okay, and when that happens, there are ways that a person might react. Well, obviously, the first way is just simply conformity. So, for instance, if a person is going to accept the culturally accepted, approved goals, and he pursues them in a way which are in culturally approved ways, so he's a conformist in this sense. He's not deviant at all. Right? So if a person wants to make a lot of money and he thinks it's good, and it's the best way is to go to school and to get a job and to push ahead and do exactly what is expected of him. So he's a conformist, and he might be very successful and might be worthwhile. Now let's say, for instance, another thing, a person accepts the culturally approved goals, but he's not able to go through the normal ways of achieving them. Okay, so he needs to figure out another way of doing it. He wants to become accepted. He wants to make a lot of money, for instance, but he can't quite get it done in the normal way. So he'll do it in a culturally unacceptable way. He might have to evade taxes, right? And that will be a deviant behavior. He might have to do some embezzlement, these deviant behaviors. But he's actually accepting the goal of becoming wealthy, but he doesn't have all the means of doing it. That is termed in the strain theory as innovation. That's the number 2. Number 3, a possibility is what we'd call, the situation would be when a person really doesn't want to go along, where he doesn't care about the idea of becoming wealthy, or the idea of becoming culturally accepted, or have an important standing. It's not important to him, but you know what? He's not interested in bucking the system. He'll go along with the ways of doing things, but the goals are not important. So he just goes through the motions of what needs to be done. This Merton calls ritualism. So he will, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to do what I have to do, I'm going to follow the ways of that have to be done, but if I achieve them, I don't achieve them, I really don't care. And that will be called ritualism. The 4th way is retreatism. Okay? In retreatism, a person doesn't care about the goals, doesn't care about how to do it, he's not interested in anything. So in this case, certainly the derelicts of society are like that. I don't care. I'm not interested in money. I'm not interested in doing things the proper way. I'm going to live my life as a hermit, or as a drunk, or as an addict, or all those things are not important to me. I'm going to be go and sell my body or go have fun, or go who knows what. I'm not interested in the goals of society and no ways of getting them, right? Not out to hurt anybody, not out to do anything, purposefully to change or interact negatively with society. Just pull myself out of it completely. That's the 4th way. And the 5th way is rebellion. And in rebellion, a person is in conflict and is intentionally trying to challenge both the goals and the means. So this is something like a gang behavior, or a biker's the society, where we are going to be proud of breaking the rules and setting our own society, or the hippie society in its time, where we are not interested, not in the money and not in the rat race, and we're going to drop out and drop acid and do our thing, or any of those types of sub-deviant cultures, which we're going to be talking about in a future session.